On September 18, 2019, Keely Bunker left the Birmingham nightclub expecting nothing more than a quiet walk home alongside a trusted friend. But by the next morning, her family was facing a nightmare no one saw coming, and the path she took that night still raises haunting questions. September 2019 was one of the biggest highlights for one Keely Bunker. She had just waved goodbye to her teenage years after turning 20. To her, this milestone signified just more than turning a year old. She was hopeful of a bright future and was full of plans. Ahead of her lied a new job interview and dreams beginning to take shape, and she also had a close-knit family behind her. Talking of family, Keely was born in 1999 in Tamworth, England, to loving parents Debbie and Christopher. Her parents spoke highly of her, hailing her for her warmth and the way her bubbly personality made their house feel alive. She also had two younger siblings who described her as more than a big sister to them, but also a protector. From the onset, Keely was the kind of person that often checked on every loved one. She was always invested in their welfare and would never go for weeks without doing so. She was also fond of helping her aunt with a differently abled child. In essence, she was the big sister and loving cousin every person would love to have. Friends also described her as loving and genuinely ready to help whenever possible. They said she had a way of turning any bad day into something bearable. She was the one who texted first and checked in when others forgot. That kind of empathy is rare, and Keely had mastered the art of expressing it effortlessly. To everyone she interacted with, she always brought light and happiness. She was the anchor, the protective one, the calm voice when things went wrong. Surprisingly, she had managed to carry all those responsibilities as a teenager. Apart from being social, Keely also had direction. You see, while many her age were still unsure of what they wanted to do with their lives, she had already figured that out. She spoke passionately of how she wanted to help children and shape their futures. To her, the nightlife was not an option. She had even arranged an interview for a teaching assistant position at her old primary school. To many, this could have seemed like a boring job, especially for a young person like Keely. Yet to her, she saw it as the first step and the foundation to what she wanted to do in life. That's why that simple milestone meant everything to her. It was a symbol of progress, purpose, and hope. Despite being rather laid back, Keely figured out that that milestone and the fact that she had turned 20 needed a little celebration. So, when she decided to go out and celebrate all that with her best friend, Monique Riggin, it was not about recklessness. It was more of marking a moment, celebrating the start of a new chapter of her life. As such, they planned a night out in Birmingham. Their itinerary involved a concert by the rapper H at the O2 Institute in Birmingham and a night out in Snob's nightclub, still within the city. There was nothing harmless in these plans. To Keely and her friend, these were the kind of memories they were supposed to make before life got more serious. The moments that would remain etched in them for years to come. Keely also saw it as a well-earned break before her next big step. Overall, the mood was light, the laughter real. Nothing about that night screamed danger. But what started as a harmless night of joy would become something else entirely. When the evening began to wind down, a small, almost forgettable choice was made. Monique offered Keely a place to crash, as she deemed this the best way to guarantee her safety. However, Keely, ever polite and trusting, declined. Her reason? "I've got Wes. He'll walk me home." Enter Wesley, Wes Street, 20, a childhood friend of Keely, someone she had known for years. This was a familiar person to Keely, and was also from the local area. The kind of person you would not think twice about walking beside in the dark. Surely, Keely had nothing to worry about. She trusted him fully to walk her home that evening. Sadly, the innocent decision by Keely would lead to one of the most haunting crimes Tamworth had ever witnessed. To understand how this story took a dark turn, we have to take a few steps back to when the three, Keely, Monique, and Wes, were having fun in the nightclub. According to an account given by Monique, while she and Keely were moderate in their consumption, Wes appeared heavily intoxicated. She explained that he was having 3 drinks for every one that they had, and was also downing vodka Red Bulls. She also explained that he vomited during their taxi ride back, a further indicator of just how drunk he was. Her account was corroborated by a bystander who described Wes as 9 out of 10 drunk. That right there was the first indicator that Keely perhaps missed, a big red flag that would have prompted her to take up Monique's offer to crash at her place and walk home the next morning. By about 4 a.m., the friends decided to call it a night and hailed a ride to take them home. Concerned that Keely had a job interview later that afternoon, Monique once again attempted to persuade her to sleep at her place. However, Keely held on to her previous answer. She had Wes. She was safe, as he would make sure she got home. That response, casual and seemingly reassuring to Monique, would later echo with chilling finality. Monique later narrated how she found some comfort in that response. After all, Wes was not a stranger at all. Little did she know that the comfort would be short-lived. At that time, the clock ticked into early Thursday morning, and Keely and Wes set off into the darkness together. It was the last time anyone would definitively see her alive. CCTV would later place them walking in the area of Tamworth Rugby Club shortly after 4 a.m. Before we go any further, subscribe now, because what happened after Keely walked into that dark night takes this story to a terrifying new level. You're about to see why trust can sometimes be catastrophic. The next morning, Monique's concern grew after Keely's phone and follow-up texts went unanswered. It heightened even further after she was informed that Keely did not turn up for her interview at her old primary school. This was so unlike Keely. She had worked so hard to get this job, and there's no way she would fail to appear for the interview without a solid reason. Also, for someone so dependable and purpose-driven, it was entirely abnormal. Little did she know that that safe night out they had enjoyed a few hours ago had shifted into something unthinkable. But at this stage, the narrative remained in that twilight zone between celebration and calamity, when a young woman full of hope began a walk she would never complete. And Monique was about to find out about all that in the most chilling and heartbreaking of ways. In that final stretch, Keely believed she was among friends, making one more small decision before dawn. The last night out label tends to roll off quickly, but in cases like this, you pause to look behind each detail. Why did she insist on walking? Why did she decline the safe option? Why did Wes claim to be able to walk her safely when his condition was visibly poor? These are all questions the investigators asked as the investigation unfolded. For now, hold on to that image. Keely and Wes walking away from the light of the city, her confident stride masking the vulnerability of that hour and the silence that would follow. Because understanding the decisions of that night is essential to grasping how trust, familiarity, and late-night vulnerability gradually culminated into tragic consequences, one that would lead to Keely losing her life in one of the most painful ways. It was at this point that family and friends sensed that something might have gone awfully wrong. Keely's father immediately contacted the police and reported his daughter missing, setting the stage for an official missing investigation. In parallel, family, friends, and neighbors sprang into action and initiated a search party. They walked trajectories, fields, side streets, and wooded patches around Tamworth, particularly the area near Wigington Park, as this is where Monique had parted ways with Keely and Wes the night before. By now, the community that was once relaxed was already drawn into anxiety and the fear of the unknown. Later that evening, as search teams scoured the small stream and tangled undergrowth in Wigington Park, they heard a scream that stopped everything. Keely's uncle, Jason Brown, who was part of the team of family and friends that were out searching for her, looked into a shallow pool partially hidden by branches. It is what he saw that triggered that horrendous scream that caught everyone else in the search party unawares. Right inside that shallow pool was Keely. Her body lay face down in water and was surrounded by twigs and leaves. There was the girl that everyone knew to be lively, happy, and always ready to help. Now she was cold, still, never to tell what happened after parting ways with Monique. Yet, it is the scene that became even more shocking, with eyewitnesses describing it as almost unbearable to witness. Her leggings and underwear were pulled down and caught on her trainers, and her hair was tangled in the branches around her. In addition to that, her lower lip was split, and bruises covered her face and neck, clear signs she had been attacked. The small patch of woodland that looked so peaceful in the early morning had become a crime scene that was hiding a terrible truth. Everything about this death pointed to one conclusion. This was not an accident. Far from it. Someone had meant to hurt her. This only made matters worse, as no one ever thought that a sweet soul like Keely could have enemies that would go to such an extent of murdering her. Later on, forensic teams revealed that they had found more than 100 injuries on her body. They indicated bruising and marks on her face and neck consistent with strangulation. There were defensive injuries on her arms and hands, suggesting she tried to protect herself. Additional bruises appeared on her torso, back, and legs, this being an indicator of repeated physical assault. They also noted some abrasions on her wrists and ankles, which seemed to be a result of a sustained struggle or being restrained. Overall, the pattern of injuries pointed to one fact. Keely did not just vanish into the night and succumb to nature or drink. Instead, she was attacked, violated, and stripped of her dignity and silenced forever. After the detectives saw the scene and read the autopsy, everything changed. They immediately knew this was not just another missing person case or a night of youthful fun gone wrong. Far from it, this was something far darker and sinister that the local community had never experienced before. Also, the small details that once seemed ordinary now started making a lot of sense as everyone also started putting the pieces together. From Keely walking alone in the early hours, trusting someone she thought she knew, the late-night drinks, and the laughter that ended too soon. What had initially looked like harmless freedom was, in hindsight, a fragile moment of vulnerability. Every choice made that night suddenly carried a weight that would lead to an untimely death of a young person that had a full life ahead of her. The first name that cropped up was none other than Wes, as he was the last person who was last seen walking with Keely. When police officers tracked him down, he seemed like a logical person to speak to. However, at this point, the police did not treat him as a suspect. Instead, they considered him to be a witness, a crucial party that could potentially help them piece together this puzzle that was ahead of them. Wes told the officers that they had parted at a phone box near Maysfield Drive and Wordsworth Avenue. He added that by the time they were parting, she was walking home fine and safe. He even took officers on a drive around, retracing the route he and Keely had supposedly taken before everyone went on their way. All this while, Wes appeared calm and cooperative, and to the ordinary eye, he would easily pass as innocent. Yet beneath that facade were thin cracks. Experienced officers easily picked a slight hesitation here, as well as a diverted gaze there, subtleties that slowly made them more interested in grilling him even more. They were fully aware that in such a high-stakes case, any flicker of tension could easily become a telltale. However, as the investigation progressed, Wes' story began to buckle. Do you remember when he first said they parted ways near a phone box, near Maysfield Drive and Wordsworth Avenue? Well, he did not stick to that narrative for long, as he would later claim that they had taken a route that went into the park, and while walking, Keely fell off his back during a piggyback move, or while messing about, and struck her head. When prompted further, he stated that he panicked when she became unresponsive. He said that he did not know what to do when Keely went floppy. He also said he checked for a pulse, but did not think to call the police. With this version, Wes seemed focused on framing the death as an unintentional injury rather than something sinister. However, this failed to add up, especially considering that Keely's body had more than 100 injuries, way too many for such a fall as explained by Wes. You would be forgiven to think that Wes would stick to that narrative for the rest of the investigation. Shockingly, he changed it. This time he stated that they had engaged in consensual sexual activity in the park, and it is during that time that the forearm he placed around her neck unintentionally caused her death. He went further and claimed that he realized Keely had died when it was too late and panicked, then hid the body. When asked why he did not say that at first, he said that he could not tell the truth because of embarrassment and fear. This also became his final storyline for the entirety of the case. Unknown to Wes, his decision to give contradicting storylines made it even easier for the investigating officers to deconstruct his account and place him right at the center of this gruesome murder. For starters, they noticed scratches across his face, and although they were small, they were sufficient proof to experienced officers of a struggle. They also ruled out a drunken fall, as there were no other signs or scars that pointed in this direction. That triggered the question: is it possible that Keely inflicted these scars onto Wes as she attempted to free herself? At that point, the question hung in the air, largely unanswered. Then came the data trail. Initially, he had told the officers that he went home immediately. However, his phone's GPS told a completely different story. It showed him lingering near Wigington Park for nearly an hour. It even pinged around the exact area where Keely's body would later be discovered, 7 times in total. Around the same period, CCTV footage placed him and Keely together near Tamworth Rugby Club at around 4:23 a.m. Moments later, that same camera caught him sprinting alone away from the park, again triggering the question, where was Keely by the time Wes was sprinting out of the park alone? Later on, the biggest bombshell that blew this case wide open came after forensic teams confirmed Keely's DNA and traces of her makeup on the sleeves of his jacket, along with his credit card, which was found near the pool where her body was hidden. These fragments were more than enough to start unraveling the calm and innocent facade that he had presented to the detectives investigating this case. The pattern was undeniable, and it was just a matter of time before the shocking truth came to light. Despite all these, detectives were shocked to see his demeanor. Initially, they expected concern, fear, and maybe even guilt. However, what they got instead was irritation. In the body-worn footage later shown in court, he can be heard telling officers almost defensively, "I feel like you're blaming me." In the clip, it was so clear that his tone was not that of a worried person that had just lost a friend and was ready to help discover the truth. It was someone feeling inconvenienced and barely waiting for all these to end so he could go on with his life. A few moments later, as police asked him to hand over his phone, he seemed to hesitate while at the same time using it before he slouched in his chair, sighing and muttering. When they asked him basic questions, he gave short and sometimes dismissive answers. And as the evening wore on, his focus shifted away from Keely entirely, and he began asking about when he could eat and what food he would be given in custody. Reports later described his demeanor as sullen, self-pitying, and detached. At no single point did he ever ask if Keely had been found. He also never asked if she was alive. Instead, he seemed more bothered by how the entire situation was affecting him. To him, Keely seemed more of a non-issue, and her welfare was not a priority to him. Once again, when asked why he had not given his final narration from the beginning, he held on to his reason about being embarrassed and scared to tell the truth. To investigators, this was not the fear of a man wrongly accused. It was the unease of someone watching his own narrative collapse. That early interview, casual on the surface, revealed everything about the psychology of guilt. A man more concerned with appearances than with the girl who never made it home. In the end, Wes' shift from being a witness to a defendant was as clear as day. The evidence did more than just contradict his statements. It erased them completely. In the end, it turned out that the last person that Keely trusted fully to walk her home became the man convicted of raping and murdering her. Once disbelief paved the way for certainty, his formal arrest and charge was the only logical conclusion. And in that moment, the investigation graduated from being about finding a missing young woman to being about holding a suspected killer accountable. In the courtroom, the prosecution team led by Jacob Hallam laid out the case with precision. They revisited the CCTV clip, which, although grainy and flinching, showed Keely walking alongside Wes. More importantly, it showed an incident where she subtly rejected his advance. It was that incident right there that team used to discredit Wes' account that the pair had shared mutual flirting and consensual intimacy. They posed a simple question. How could someone that had already rejected advances suddenly have a change of mind and consent to intimacy in such a short time? The prosecution went on to label his shifting narratives as part of a carefully crafted scheme of lies. And just when everyone thought they had heard it all concerning this case, Wes took to the stand and uttered what might easily be one of the most chilling statements by a defendant. With a cold demeanor, he said, "I put her in that pond, and that's something I have to sleep with." Far from the expected remorse of someone who claimed innocence, this was outright self-pity and not sorrow. He had completely disregarded the fact that he ended the life of a person in one of the most inhumane ways. The jury also heard how he returned repeatedly to the scene in an effort to cover the body with branches and make it more difficult for it to be found. Perhaps this explains why his phone GPS pinged at the very same location a whopping 7 times. The subsequent use of his debit card near the site, as well as other digital footprints that placed him at the crime scene, only made it easier for the jury and the prosecution to neutralize his defense and reveal his real personality. But this story was far from over. What came next sent shockwaves throughout Britain as the truth began to stretch far beyond Keely's murder. This is after it became apparent that Wes' crime was not a single act of violence. Quite the opposite. It was part of a deeply disturbing pattern. Soon after, survivors of his pattern of abuse stretching back years started coming out to tell their horror stories in his hands. In the end of it all, he was charged with 2 further rape counts, 3 sexual assaults, and a charge of sexual activity with a child. This owing to the fact that his victims ranged between 15 and 20. One of these young girls spoke directly in court and explained how she had to carry all the guilt after he attacked her. Her reason? She initiated it all by visiting his place and later kissing him. Deep down, she compelled herself to believe that she had invited the assault. She was quoted as saying, "It wasn't until I heard what happened to Keely that I found the courage to tell someone. Before that, I blamed myself." Another victim said, "After Wesley attacked me, I was scared to tell anyone. But when I heard what happened to Keely, I realized I couldn't stay silent." These statements struck the heart of the case and only served to solidify what the prosecution team had already found out. More importantly, they served to reaffirm that when the trusted friend becomes the predator, the silence of victims can last until someone bold enough to break it gives them a voice. Keely's story became that spark. The bravery of those other women brought context to the courtroom, showing this was not an isolated incident, but part of a premeditated action. Just before the verdict, the judge gave Keely's family an opportunity to give their victim impact statements, and they cut through in the most emotional way. Keely's mum, Debbie, emotionally mourned her dear daughter, saying, "We will never forgive, never forget. Our home is broken. Our lives are shattered." She went on to describe her as the kindest, most caring, innocent young lady you could ever meet, and who was only just starting out in her life. On his side, Keely's father stated that a once happy home was now filled with silence, and that her siblings were now shadows of who they used to be. Her extended family described her loss as something they did not know how to process. These words were more than just raw emotions. They formed part of the legacy of the case and also reminded the court and the general public that Keely mattered and that her life had worth. She died a painful death, and no one else had to die in such a way, ever. Then came August 5th, 2020. After days of testimony, forensic evidence, and chilling CCTV footage, the jury foreman eventually stood. He then spoke the words that many had waited for. Wesley Street was guilty of rape and murder. Moments later, at Stafford Crown Court, the judge pronounced a sentence that would define the rest of his life. Life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years before he could even be considered for parole. However, this was later reduced to 29 years and 64 days, owing to the time he had stayed in prison during the case. Regardless, the message was the same. He would grow old behind bars. As the judge was delivering the sentence, he hailed Keely as a young woman full of promise, whose trust had been so cruelly exploited. He also took notice of how Wes showed no remorse and described the whole act as calculated betrayal of a friend who saw only good in him. As the gavel came down, there was no sense of relief. Just a heavy and tense quiet. Justice had been served, but it could never restore the life that was taken. Perhaps the most powerful legacy lies in what Keely's case triggered in the UK legal system. At the time, some killers were using what's known as the rough sex gone wrong defense. This is when they argued that a death occurred during consensual sexual activity, hence reducing the charge or sentence. However, the increased attention that her case received triggered the need for legislative change. And that change came in April 2021, when the Domestic Abuse Act 2021 received royal assent. According to this act, a person cannot consent to serious harm leading to death in sexual activity. In practical terms, the law closed the loophole that had allowed some defendants to use the rough sex argument. In the end, Keely's murder raised awareness, not only of predatory behavior, but of how the justice system treats it, and how laws must evolve to protect those at risk.